We begin this morning with relief in Washington as President Biden is set to sign the debt ceiling bill later today, averting disaster.
Yeah, the Senate passed the bill late last night by a 63-36 vote, just days before the country was set to run out of money to pay its bills, preventing what could have been a devastating default. It extends the debt limit for another 2 years and includes some spending caps, but despite that, it did receive bipartisan support.
This demanded a bipartisan solution. We knew we'd need to come together for a solution like the one that passed tonight. And so I'm happy to stand here passing this critical legislation to support our families, preserve vital programs, and most importantly, avoid catastrophic default.
NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memley joins us now for more on this. Mike, good morning. And so there were a lot of questions about what would happen in the Senate. There were, of course, some hurdles along the way, but we seem to have avoided what some of the most dire predictions were saying. So how did this all play out in the end?
Yeah, Stephen, if you had asked most people in Washington a week ago, while Speaker McCarthy and President Biden were still negotiating this deal, and even, frankly, 48 hours ago before the House voted on this, whether Congress would be able to pass something, and not only pass something, but with 3 days to spare before that default deadline, you would have gotten a lot of strange looks. But that's exactly what happened as we saw the Senate last night follow that strong result in the House, more than 300 votes, more than 63 votes last night, 47 Republicans, that's all but 4, and 46 Democrats, 17 Republicans voting to get this across the finish line. You saw Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer taking a little bit of a victory lap and also giving some credit across the aisle. Take a listen.
We've saved the country from the scourge of default, even though there were some on the other side who wanted default, wanted to lead us to default. We may be a little tired, but we did it. Look at the vote. Underestimating Kevin McCarthy, look at the vote in the House and Senate. That says it all. We didn't underestimate him. So it worked out very, very well. And that's the bottom line.
Schumer saying we're all a little bit tired. This was a marathon series of votes that happened last night in the Senate. 11 amendments that ultimately all were voted down. If any had been adopted, this would have had to go back to the House, something that would have really led to a time crunch. Ultimately, we saw 2 really powerful forces getting this across the finish line. One is momentum following that House vote, and the other is jet fumes. Frankly, a lot of the senators saw where this was heading and decided they could have stretched this out, but they'd rather be home.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a big motivator. President Biden also put out a statement, Mike, after that vote, where he said the debt ceiling deal is a big win for the economy and American people. And speaking of victory laps, he's expected to address the nation tonight. What are we expected to hear? Is this going to be a victory lap for him?
Yeah, this was a big win for Speaker McCarthy and a big win for President Biden, because if you think about one of the core promises he made as a candidate in the 2020 election was to bring sort of Washington back to normalcy, to unite the country. He acknowledged months ago that that was one of the hardest things that's been on his agenda to try to do. But this is as clear an example of him being able to deliver on that promise as we've had during his time in Washington. A lot of major bipartisan bills have, in fact, been signed into law. So it's interesting, the venue and the message tonight, because remember, a lot of Democrats had been critical of the White House for ceding the messaging war throughout this debt ceiling standoff to Speaker McCarthy. We saw him talking to reporters almost multiple times a day, every day, while the president had largely been on the sidelines. This was all, according to White House officials, part of the strategy. He didn't want to engage in a tit for tat with Republicans that might upset this effort to get to a bipartisan compromise. And so now he'll be able to speak to the country in one of the most grand settings you have, the Oval Office. He hasn't done this yet as president, and take a victory lap, but also say he's delivering on his promise to the American people.
That'll be something to see. And Mike, I do have to ask about student loans, though, for a minute. The bill includes that provision to restart the student loan payments that have been frozen for the pandemic, like 3 years now. And a separate vote yesterday, the Senate also passed the legislation that would just block the loan relief program altogether. So bottom line with these things, what does that mean for people with student debt?
Well, ultimately, the president has vowed to veto that separate resolution that was passed in the Senate yesterday to undo his student loan relief and end that pause on student loan repayments. And so this has been an interesting thing that we've seen happen in the Senate throughout the year. A Democratic-controlled Senate now having passed multiple resolutions to overturn some of President Biden's achievements. Why is this happening? Well, this is all about 2024 politics. You look at the Democrats that voted for this yesterday to try to get it over the finish line, which it did. It's Joe Manchin of West Virginia, John Tester of Montana, two Democrats running for re-election in very red states. They want to be able to say they stood up to the president on certain issues, and this is an example of that. But the president ultimately going to be able to veto this and leave this up to the Supreme Court. That's one of the big decisions we're waiting on for the Supreme Court to weigh in on the legality of that student loan relief, and that's expected to come later this month.
At this point, when pretty much anything happens, the answer to why is likely going to be 2024. All right, Mike and Emily, thanks so much.
We're learning new details this morning about the special counsel's investigation into the mishandling of classified documents discovered at former President Trump's resort in Mar-a-Lago. Sources tell NBC News that federal prosecutors have obtained an audio recording of Trump acknowledging the documents in his possession were classified. We want to point out that NBC News has not heard the recording. The former president has denied any wrongdoing. He claims all the documents were declassified as soon as they left the White House. Take a listen.
Why did you take those documents with you when you left the White House?
I had every right to under the Presidential Records Act. You have the Presidential Records Act. I was there, and I took what I took, and it gets declassified.
When it comes to your documents, did you ever show those classified documents to anyone?
Not really. I would have the right to. By the way, they were declassified
What do you mean, not really?
after. Not that I can think of. Let me just tell you, I have the absolute right to do whatever I want with them.
NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney joins us now from Washington with the latest. Ken, good morning. What do we know about this recording so far? Do we know when it was taken and who was in the room when that audio was recorded?
Good morning. A source directly familiar with this recording said that it was taken in July 2021 during a meeting between Donald Trump and some people who were working on a biography of his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows. Trump was at his compound in Bedminster, and the subject of Iran came up, and Trump referenced, according to this source, a document that he had that he acknowledged was classified that laid out some military options about striking Iran. So the significance was he acknowledged it was classified, and also deeply significant that it undercuts the claim by him and some of his lawyers that he declassified all the documents he took with him to the White House. And we understand that this document has been obtained by special counsel Jack Smith, has been played during grand jury testimony, and appears to be a significant piece of evidence.
And Ken, what kind of evidence have we seen so far in that grand jury investigation? How does this new recording impact the former president's defense here?
So if the accounts we're getting about this tape are accurate, some lawyers have called this a smoking gun. It's essentially Donald Trump confessing on tape that he knew he had classified information. Remember, after he was president, no longer had access to it. So this would be huge. Now, of course, we don't know what other evidence the special counsel has gathered in this investigation, all of it, but we've seen a lot of reports about circumstantial evidence suggesting that Donald Trump may have been obstructing justice, that the people around him were moving documents after they had been requested by the government, that there was kind of a game of hide the ball here. And Trump himself has said publicly that he thought these documents were his, that he didn't believe the government was entitled to them. So it's looking like a pretty strong case. But again, we don't know everything the special counsel knows.
Ken, is the special counsel any closer to ending the investigation and these classified documents? Are charges possible?
Yeah, the consensus in the legal community really has been for a long time that had any other person engaged in the conduct that we've seen, even in public, they would have been charged by now. And there's a great expectation that this case is wrapping up. We have some evidence that the grand jury in this matter hasn't met for a while. And so there's a lot of expectation that we'll see some kind of resolution this summer and perhaps criminal charges. Back to you.
More to come. Ken Delaney, and thanks so much.
All right, let's get to some new developments in that terrifying building collapse that happened in Iowa. Reports out this morning say a contractor actually warned about the building's conditions just days before that collapse happened. Now, families are looking to city officials to get some answers. NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster has the latest.
Hi there. Well, we are seeing here at the site increased activity take place at the building that partially collapsed several days ago. The family of the men who are trapped inside tell NBC News that they were told by city officials that a search and rescue team has been reactivated as new questions into the condition of the building and what led to the collapse in the first place are being raised.
Exclusive new video of the moment this Davenport, Iowa apartment building suddenly collapsed 4 days ago. Officials say 3 people are likely still trapped in the rubble. Brandon Colvin, Ryan Hitchcock, and Daniel Prian were each living in parts of the building no longer standing.
All the information provided to us is that that space is not sustainable for life.
The update comes amid new questions about missed warning signs in the days before the partial collapse.
I just told him, leave, get away, back away.
This was the day before the actual collapse.
Yes.
Ryan Schaefer runs a masonry business. He says the owner of the building rejected his bid to make repairs back in February because of the costs to support the structure.
I was nervous when I was in the basement, if that tells you anything.
You were nervous even being there?
Yes.
He says for months he monitored the building with alarm.
Every single one's crooked and broken.
Concerned the building was going to fall, he posted this Snapchat video Saturday, taking these photos just hours before Sunday's collapse.
That was a definite sign that the center of the building was falling due to the structural damage, which affected the windows shattering and the doors bowing. And
it's an obvious sign for you that something's wrong.
Oh yeah, that terrified me when I saw that.
His account comes as city officials released a trove of documents showing at least 145 interactions between the city and property owner Andrew Wold since 2020, including inspection photos of indoor temperatures as low as 57 degrees, and a letter from an engineer dated 4 days before the collapse warning large patches of brick appear ready to fall imminently.
The property owner has declined our request for an interview and released a statement extending his prayers to the tenants. Meanwhile, here, officials are still concerned about the structural stability of this building. They warned that it could really collapse at any point, and they said that any demolition that takes place will be done with care, as they're calling this a place of rest with 3 people still trapped inside. Back to you.
Quite alarming. All right, Shaq, thank you.
Well, we're just 1 week into the summer travel season and have already hit a major snag. Roughly 90% of Spirit Airlines flights were delayed Thursday because of a technical issue that impacted the airline's website, app, and airport kiosks. Mark Elwood is a travel expert. He joins us now with more. Good morning, Mark. So the big question is always, do we know exactly what happened yesterday, and how are things looking this morning?
Well, we don't really know exactly what happened. The best analogy I can give you is imagine trying to change a wheel on a car while it's still driving. That's what the airline technology is like. They're not able to upgrade it very easily because it's always in use, and it keeps going wrong because they can't ever really take it offline because we're always flying. Today is looking a bit better, but we don't have full notice yet. So I'd cross your fingers and hope it's fully resolved. The airlines do say it is, but let's hope that.
I guess we'll have to wait and see. Spirit wasn't the only airline to have problems yesterday. Air Canada also had technical glitches that delayed some of its flights. Do you think we're in for some of the same issues this summer as we had last year with cancellations and delays?
Look, this summer is going to be busier than ever. That revenge travel, that pent-up inability to travel we have, you're seeing 85% of Americans saying we're taking a trip. And the airports and the airlines are still not quite up to scratch. They still need more people back. They still need to hire more people back. So there's real strains at the scene. So yes, I think the summer will be tricky, but if you're prepared, you should be okay.
Speaking of being prepared, finally, what are some things you can do if your flight is canceled or delayed?
Look, remember, when your flight is delayed, you have fewer rights than you wish you did. The current administration is trying to bring in a few more rights, but it's all up to the discretion of the airline. So ask nicely. If canceled, you have a lot more rights, but I would say check your credit card. If you paid for your flight with a credit card, look and see if it includes trip delay protection. That's basically a fallback which will cover any expenses that you incur if your trip goes wrong. So your credit card can really be a secret weapon, and you might have that for free and not even know it's part of your benefits.
All right, I think a lot of people will be planning for the worst and hoping for the best. Mark Elwood, thanks so much.
Oh, fingers crossed.
Turning to your weather now, and let's take a look at this. Heavy rains in Texas leading to serious flooding. You can see cars nearly underwater, drivers having to escape through their windows, and more rain is expected there today.
Yikes. Well, for more on that, plus a tropical depression in the Gulf, meteorologist Angie Lassman is tracking it all for us. Good morning, Angie.
Good morning, guys. It was a busy day yesterday with Tropical Depression 2 forming and, of course, the active weather in parts of the plains. We're going to get to the plains here in a moment because there's another day where you could see rounds of heavy rain and even some severe storms. But let's focus on tropical depression, too. Still a tropical depression, most likely not going to become a tropical storm, but there's still a chance. That window, however, for it to do so is starting to close. As it moves a little farther to the south, it's going to kind of encounter some hostile environment for any further strengthening. Either way, 285 miles west of Fort Myers right now, pretty lopsided and unorganized. All the rain sitting just to the north, the center of that, the center not looking great either. 35-mile-per-hour winds and moving south now at 5 miles per hour. It's going to speed up a little bit over the next day or so as it moves south and eventually southeast and eyes parts of western Cuba. But what does it mean for the state of Florida? That's who it's really going to impact kind of indirectly with some added rainfall and multiple rounds of it. These are going to be tropical downpours that bring heavy rain to folks there through the weekend. A little bit of a soggy kind of Saturday and Sunday forecast for you, too. Hence the reason that we have this flood watch that went up yesterday and continues through the day today with that heavy rain. It does include Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and up into parts near Lake Okeechobee, so be aware of that. Here's the rainfall totals you can expect. Upwards of 5 inches is possible in some localized spots. So we know with all the problems Florida has when it comes to heavy rain in a short amount of time, there will likely be some flooding. Watch for that. Do not drive through those flooded roadways. That's what happened yesterday in parts of the plains. We saw some incredible video. And today, we're going to have another chance to see that localized flash flooding possible with heavy rain once again working through that same area. Parts of Texas into Oklahoma and Kansas could see upwards of 1, maybe 2, even spots could see 3 inches. So again, the flooding is a real concern for us today. There's also a chance for severe weather, better than what we saw yesterday. So this right now is looking like we'll see the main hazards being hail, upwards of 2 inches, and those strong wind gusts up to 75 miles per hour. But we can't rule out tornadoes either. So if you live in this area, really focus mainly into parts of Texas. That's going to be something you'll have to watch for. Now, if you're looking for the heat, it's in the Northeast and in the Midwest. Look at these records that we could potentially break today. 92 in Hartford, that would beat a record of 91 degrees. Cincinnati, you're headed to 92. Not quite a record, but warm nonetheless, especially for this time of year. It doesn't last all that long. If you live in the Northeast, tomorrow we drop to 66 degrees. We're talking below normal temperatures. And it does last, however, though, if you're in the Midwest. So 88 tomorrow in Detroit, Indianapolis, you're still going to be into the 90s. We'll kind of moderate out by the time we get into the end of the weekend and into early next week. Mid 70s for Philly for Sunday, 78 on Monday, and 80s Monday and Tuesday for Richmond. So these temperatures are a little more tolerable, a little more typical for this time of year. But 90s, you know, we could see some of the warmest days of the year so far in places like Detroit, Philly, Washington, D.C. today.
Wow, just in time for June. It's
shorts and T-shirt weather, right?
I like it. All right, Angie.
As long as you approve.
I do. Got my stamp of approval.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.